and it's always great to get up in the House and talk about things that are important to Canadians. And of course, a Budget Implementation Act would be something that we'd all would like to think is very important to Canadians. You know, Madam Speaker, what this budget really is an omnibus bill full of hypocrisy. And I think the member from Winnipeg North would probably agree with me when I talk about hypocrisy, because I can remember the days when he talked about omnibus bills and how bad they were and how horrible they were. Yet here he is today, he's going to be defending one. You know, a classic example, Madam Speaker, is you look at Saskatchewan and what this bill is supposed to do for people in Saskatchewan. And I look at the agriculture sector, which is important to me. There is nothing in this bill of substance to help canola farmers. There's nothing in this bill of substance to help fisheries, both who are facing tariffs out of China, who need market relief and market help to gain market access into not only the Chinese market, but other markets around the world. There's nothing really been set aside to assist these guys to work with them. There's nothing in there for the forestry sector other than more debt and more loans. There's nothing there that's actually going to give them a game plan to actually solve the problems that they have in the U.S., to actually look at expanding their markets into other parts of the world, to actually look at using the wood and wood products in different ways that would actually take them into the next generation and allow them to export throughout the world. There's nothing really there to do that. But, Madam Speaker, what is there? There's pieces of the legislation on Canada Post Corporation. What that has to do with Budget Implementation Act, I'm not sure, but it's there. There's a piece on Farm Credit Canada, which is concerning and something that I think is important to talk about. Farm Credit Canada, make sure it's delivering things in a most effective, meaningful measure. The minister is actually going to have a report in 5 years, not this year or next year, but in 5 years, when there is no longer a Liberal government, to report to the committee to talk about farm credit and how it's operating and functioning. Now, Madam Speaker, I remember the days when banks wouldn't touch farmers. I remember there's a reason why Farm Credit was an organization that was created to help farmers, because there was a time and place where banks looked at farming as too much risk. So FCC has been a great partner for the farming community right across Canada. Now, as I see them wanting to pry into FCC, I am suspicious of what their motives is. If they really want to do something proper on FCC, they shouldn't put it in a Budget Implementation Act. They actually should run it through the Agriculture Committee and actually do a study on it and then come back to the House and provide its own set of motions and legislation. But no, what do? They put it in the Budget Implementation Act. You got Special Economic Measures Act. Now, if you look at this, Madam Speaker, it looks to me like finance and global affairs can't get along. Because historically, under this measures, if they wanted to put a restriction on a financial institution, global affairs could do that. But now they can't. They actually have to have more red tape and talk to global affairs, or global affairs has to talk to finance before they can take action. Again, just putting in more red tape to things that needs to be done faster and more efficiently. You know, I also look at things that are in this budget that actually they've stolen from the Conservative Party. And they're good things. And the member from Winnipeg North can't accuse me of not saying anything good. And I'll look at the Indigenous First Nations Goods and Services Tax Act. It's empowering First Nations to tax themselves, to look at a sales tax for themselves, to raise revenues, to fulfill their financial requirements to meet the needs of their people. This is a Conservative value. This is something that was in the Conservative platform that the Liberal Party gladly stole. And this is something that I could get behind. But again, Madam Speaker, this should be its own piece of legislation. It should not be part of the Budget Implementation Act. It should be something that's gone through the appropriate committees in the appropriate time frame to flesh out all the issues around it so that it can be done properly. It deserves more than a 2-minute reading in a committee touched in with 600 pages of other items. It is a good policy, but it will not see the proper line of day, the proper scrutiny. You know, Madam Speaker, when you look at the Broadcasting Act, for example, why would that be in a Budget Implementation Act? Why wouldn't that be its own act going through committees on its own? Why does it have to be part of BIA? If you look at the Humans, Pathogens, this is a great one, Humans, Pathogens, and Toxins Act. Think about that. What does that have to do with finance? Nothing. This is the Liberal government exposing their hypocrisy, shoving things into one bill to avoid actually utilizing the House of Commons and Parliament and the committee structure to get a better bill, to get better oversight, to get a better piece of legislation that will benefit all of Canadians. The Aeronautics Act is in the budget. Did you know that, folks? Aeronautics, yeah, it's in the budget. No, we're not funding a space program. We're just changing some meanings to the act. Okay, but we couldn't get canola in there. We couldn't get forestry workers in there. We couldn't get fishery workers in there. We couldn't get things that would actually reduce the cost to Canadians. We couldn't get things in there that would actually protect Canadians and their financial stability in the future, which is something that this government ran on. They talked about in their campaign how they were going to protect Canadians. They're going to make sure that they got the best deal, elbows up with Donald Trump, all that. There's nothing that they talked about in their election campaign in here that's protecting Canadians, other than putting them at more risk with higher debt and higher interest payments that they and their grandkids and great-grandkids are going to have to pay. That's what they put on the Canadian population. Yet they still found time to include all these things that really aren't Canadian priorities, but are priorities of the bureaucracy or pet projects of the Liberal government. You know, Madam Speaker, coming from Saskatchewan, it's important when a budget comes along that the needs of people of Saskatchewan are at least talked about and represented. It's important that people across Canada feel that the budget is actually going to be something that will benefit them as they move forward, that'll make life easier, more affordable. There is nothing in this Budget Limitation Act or in the budget itself that really does that. It's really a shell game. It's talking about things that have either already been approved and done, or it's talking about things that are high and mighty that really don't accomplish anything, or it's more about, in the Budget Limitation Act, is bureaucrats who have their pet projects who are trying to maneuver and take advantage of a new government to get their will done. Not Canadians' will, but their own personal will. Madam Speaker, this is rather disappointing. It's rather disturbing to see this in this type of bill. And to come back to the omnibus style of the bill, the hypocrisy that is shown by this Liberal government is just totally unbelievable. But then I guess we shouldn't be surprised. Liberals are full of hypocrisy over the last 10 years. Hypocrisy is creating a problem and then basically saying, okay, we're the only ones that know how to have a solution for it. They've created a problem in this country over the bad policies over the last 10 years. They have made our country stagnant. They've created economic policies that have actually put our kids in a scenario where they probably will never be able to buy a house. And instead of using the Budget Limitation Act or the budget to actually put in proper policies to make life more affordable to Canadians, to look at things that would help seniors, protect them in their retirement, to look at things that are actually going to grow the economy, policies have to be right. They haven't made the policies. When anything they've got wrong, what have they done? They've just thrown more money at it thinking that it'll go away. If you don't fix the problem, you don't get the proper solution. And money doesn't always fix the problem. So, Madam Speaker, I'm going to leave it at that, letting you know that this Budget Limitation Act is a severe disappointment. It's disappointing because it could have done so much. It had the opportunity, it had the will of Canadians who wanted to see this government do things for them and succeed. And they let us down again. Madam Speaker, this is a horrible Budget Limitation Act. It's an omnibus bill, and actually it should not see the light of day. I won't vote for it. Absolutely not. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, there's no shock over here that the member opposite's not going to vote in favour of the budget. At the end of the day, we just need to recognize the contrast between the Conservative Party and the government, the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party believes that you have to invest in Canadians. You have to invest in the economy. Now is a great time to do it. And coincidentally, we have every premier of the provinces and our territories in agreement that are working with Ottawa. We have a Prime Minister that is out securing additional potential markets for trade beyond the Canada-US borders. We have a budget that delivers from children to seniors, that covers the spectrum. Yet the Conservatives just want to stand by, do nothing, spread misinformation wherever they can, and say, well, we want to be in government someday. Where is the plan? Does the Conservative Party of Canada even have a plan to present to Canadians?
The Honourable Member for Prince Albert.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank the member from Winnipeg North for hosting the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the Grey Cup. You did a great job, and we really appreciate the fact. And I know he is a closet Rider fan, Madam Speaker. I know that. In regards to the difference to the Liberal approach and the Conservative approach, there is a big difference. You bet there's a big difference. Liberals would rather take taxpayers' money, throw it at a problem, instead of sitting back and analyzing the problem and fixing the policy that's creating the problem. Let me repeat that. Fix the policy. If you fix the policy, you create the private investment that actually will see the economy grow. What do? They take the other way. Okay, we got a problem. Instead of fixing it, we'll just throw more money at it and we'll put a Band-Aid on it, and that'll be fine for now because it'll get us through to the next election. But in the meantime, that compounds. And we're seeing that compounding effect over the last 10 years hitting our economy as we speak today, Madam Speaker, and we can't allow the Liberals to do that anymore.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his speech. In the budget, there are huge amounts in deficit, and there's a lot of spending in defense. So it's about 70 billion in deficit and about 50 billion in defense spending and investment. Does he feel it's responsible to spend this much on defense given the deficit?
I wish we had a surplus so we could spend that much money with a surplus, but reality is reality. This government has mismanaged the economy so bad over the last 10 years that we are in deficit. And the reality is, in this world, it's not the place it was 15, 20 years ago. So yes, unfortunately, we're going to have to borrow money and we're going to have to spend it under defense. We're going to have to make sure our men and women in the military have the tools they have to protect our country. There's no way around that. I'd love to see it under a different financial situation, no question about that. But we aren't given that luxury because of bad management of this Liberal government.
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River and Northern Rock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to my colleague from Saskatchewan, and congratulations on his Grey Cup win. But my question was in regards to his speech. You know, the Liberal government across the way has spoken many times against omnibus legislation, but here we are, and they've done it many, many times. But another thing that Liberals often do is they throw money at things. And one particular statistic from this budget, it adds over 5 years, after 5 years of Liberal governance, we'll see another $321 billion added to our debt. And I'm just going to ask the member one simple question. Does he think throwing money at the problem is going to solve the issues in Canada? I'm not seeing any infrastructure getting built. In northern BC, we have a need for a bridge across the Peace River. Hasn't been done. I don't see it in the budget. Does he agree that throwing money at problems solves them? Because I haven't seen that yet. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Prince Albert.
Madam Speaker, in 2008 crisis, the Harper government did spend money on infrastructure. They put it into lift stations. They put it into things that weren't the sexy items. There were things that Canadians needed to have in order to have a proper functioning economy. So, if you look at it, Madam Speaker, yes, proper investments given where you can actually feel and touch the asset that Canadians looked at. And I will remind you, during that time frame, it wasn't the government that picked the projects. It was the municipal government. It was the provincial government. Here, it's the federal government who is dictating what projects get a green light and what don't. If you want to name it, basically your committee that you've just set up for your big, beautiful projects. There's your name. Look at all 10 of them.